On July 20, 1923, Machi Hisayaki was born in Shiba, Japan, and his Korean name is Sung Gwang-young. He founded one of Japan's most notorious Yakuza gangs, the Tosei Kai, and he was even nicknamed the Genza Tiger, with memberships over 1,500 members in the early 60s. Machi's vast empire included tourism, entertainment, bars, and restaurants. He even operated the largest ferry service between Japan and South Korea, the shortest route between the two countries. Most people think that the Yakuza is linked to native Japanese, but ethnic Koreans like Machi make up over 30% of the Yakuza, and they only represent 0.5% of the Japanese population. What's interesting is that Japan itself is a pretty fair society where most people are part of the middle class, and you're only really branded an outcast if you stand out. You see, many Yakuza members come from marginalized groups. These include the ethnic Koreans, the Byakumen, a group that we'll talk about later in this video, and those with criminal records. In the early 90s, 18 out of the top 90 bosses of the Inagawa Kai were ethnic Koreans. This was Japan's third largest Yakuza group. To be fair, many of these members had no other choice. They were shut out of mainstream opportunities and discriminated against by major companies. Koreans who came over or were brought were never really fully accepted. Generations later, Japanese Koreans were still shunned from jobs and live in poverty. This means that the only way to survive is by working outside the system in unscrupulous ways. In a nutshell, many resort to organized crime. Basically, if you think about it, if you choose not to support a group in your own country, someone else will step in. And we can understand this imbalance more by looking at the history, discrimination, and poverty of these people. To do this, we must explore three things. First, the root of Korean migration to Japan. Second, the discrimination against Koreans and the Byakumen. Third, the roles that Koreans have taken in Japan. Koreans in Japan have a history of dating back to the early 20th century. Japanese formally annexed Korea in 1910. Before this, Koreans had begun migrating to Japan as students, merchants, and workers. However, Japanese colonial rule increased Korean migration. Many wanted better opportunities, while others were brought to Japan for labor. By the time that World War II ended, 2 million Koreans were living in Japan. Many had served in the Japanese military or worked in industries critical to the war effort. Up to 30,000 ethnic Koreans died in the atomic bomb explosion in Hiroshima, and over 250,000 served under the Imperial Japanese military. Despite being integral to Japan's economic infrastructure, ethnic Koreans faced severe discrimination. Koreans lost their Japanese citizenship because Japan gave up its colonies, including Korea, so they were no longer considered citizens of the Japanese Empire. As a result, the majority of ethnic Koreans, 1 to 1.5 million, left Japan. By 1948, the population of ethnic Koreans settled around 600,000. Those who stayed had jobs and family ties with Japanese citizens. Others simply did not have enough money to fund their trip back home. Those who remained in Japan were labeled Zenichi Koreans, meaning residing in Japan. And this basically signified the expectation that they would eventually return home to Korea, but many of them could not. Generations of Koreans remained in Japan, existing in a precarious legal limbo. Unless one of your parents is a Japanese citizen, nobody born in Japan gains citizenship. Japan uses a Ketoshugi system for citizenships. This means that it usually depends on one's parents' nationality and not their birthplace. For decades, Koreans in Japan face widespread social as well as institutional discrimination. They face exclusions from many jobs, denied welfare, and marriage discrimination. Employment policies excluded Koreans from all Japanese jobs after 1945. Koreans were barred from public as well as private jobs, so they found work working in the informal sector. They engaged in illegal activities like producing bootleg alcohol, recycling scraps, and even racketeering. This marginalization, like the Byakumen's flight, created a low-class society with little chance to rise. The Byakumens were a caste-based group. They shared the same language, religion, custom, and even looked like other Japanese. However, they were relegated to segregated communities. They were often in poorly drained or uninhabitable areas. All this was simply due to the fact that their ancestors had jobs linked to death, like being a butcher or undertaker during feudal Japan. And Japan abolished the legal caste distinctions in the 19th century, but a stigma around the Byakumen persists. Much of this is simply due to Buddhist as well as Shinto prohibitions against shedding blood or relations to death. Both Koreans and Byakumens were systematically excluded from mainstream Japanese society. In the mid-1970s, it was revealed that employers use a secret list to screen job applicants for Byakumen ancestry. A Byaku right group found a 330-page handwritten list of Byaku names and community locations, and it was being sold secretly to employers by mail order. Many big-name Japanese firms were using this to screen job applications. In 2009, there was a public outcry when Google Earth added historical maps of Tokyo and Osaka. They pinpointed Byaku villages during feudal times. This revived issues about prejudice as well as profiling, showing that caste-like discrimination still existed. For many Koreans, discrimination was solely due to their non-Japanese origin. Many were forced into marginalized industries like running gambling parlors or simply doing illicit activities. Employment policies barred them from having middle-class jobs, so many took low-paying, high-risk jobs or simply joined the criminal underworld. Many ethnic Koreans faced systematic exclusion, turned to the Yakuza. It was a place where societal boundaries of ethnicity and caste were less strict. In the Yakuza, discrimination based on heritage was replaced with a sense of fraternity and loyalty to the organization. For marginalized groups like Koreans and Byakumen, the Yakuza offered a way to make money. It also provided respect, protection, and power. And from that, the Yakuza was born and managed to be a formidable force in Japan. Suddenly, a sizable portion of the population can make decent money. They gain some respect through dodgy means, and this makes sense since people will naturally gravitate towards avenues of success. And if you shut them out of mainstream opportunities, some will find and devote their energy towards alternative paths. And this is very similar to the Italian as well as the Irish mobs in America. And if you're really interested, the novel Punchiko dives into this in a really relatable way. I highly recommend it to anybody who's more interested in this topic. For many ethnic Koreans, this means running pachinko or gambling parlors or doing Yakuza work. Both can be relatively lucrative, but so seedy that most ethnic Japanese simply want nothing to do with them. They include Machi Hisayuki, who I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Others include Jiro Yanagawa, a top figure in Osaka's underworld. They use outsider status to exploit the black market and build a powerful criminal syndicate. The Yakuza provided a way for Koreans to navigate around the barrier of the legal system and find prosperity in the face of exclusion. The Yakuza also included Koreans for pragmatic reasons. Ethnicity mattered less than loyalty and skills in making money and gaining power. Ethnic Koreans were also not the only marginalized group in the Yakuza. The Byakumen, a group ostracized for impure jobs, also turned to organized crime for refuge. Byakumens make up roughly 60% of Yakuza members and face deep discrimination. Both Koreans and Byakumen turned to the Yakuza as an avenue for social mobility when the rest of Japanese society shut its doors. A 2000 speech by a former public security intelligence agency officer estimated that roughly 60% were from Byakumen backgrounds. The other 30% were made up of Japanese-born Koreans, and the remaining 10 were Chinese as well as Japanese with criminal records.
先ほど言いましたいわゆる童話の関係者であります。そして30%がこれが在日の人たちであります。そしてさらにもっと言いますと
An exclusion in Japan created a bond within the Yakuza. It became a place of refuge for those who were shut out of the mainstream opportunities. However, some Koreans have integrated into Japanese society. They're successful in business like Masayoshi's son, the CEO of SoftBank. And nowadays, many even marry Japanese daughters and sons, making their sons Japanese as well. However, most of these individuals are still trapped within the shadow economy. Discrimination, however, is less common nowadays, but this legacy still affects the Korean community in Japan. This has led to ongoing participation in organized crime. As Japan globalizes, historical barriers are slowly eroding. However, deep-rooted social biases still remain. In fact, it's taboo to talk about it in Japan. It was one of the reasons why the Japanese version of Kaplan and Duplo's Yakuza in 1986, a detailing of the Yakuza in Japan, was not published until 1991. The 1991 version deleted descriptions of the gang's membership being related to Koreans. As Japan tightened its laws against organized crime and society becomes more open, the role of the Yakuza is diminishing. The future of Koreans in Yakuza remains uncertain. Yakuza membership has declined since the Japanese government passed an anti-gang law aimed at them in 1992. Japan passed laws to increase liability for criminal activities, making it illegal for companies and small business owners to do business with the Yakuza. However, there's still no strict policies against Yakuza membership. The Yamaguchi-gami is the largest Yakuza family with roughly 8,000 members. If Koreans gain better access to education and jobs, they might rely less on criminal activities to survive. And this has been the case so far, slowly but surely. In 1979, there was only one Korean lawyer in Japan. As of 2018, there were over 100 of them in the country. In 1991, Koreans were granted special permanent resident status. This recognized their unique place in Japanese society. The status lets them work in previously off-limit jobs like teaching in public schools. Today, Japan has roughly 500,000 Koreans in the country, and many of them are still considered a underprivileged group, but simply in the modern world. However, the Japanese are becoming more and more welcoming to foreigners than they used to be, and the power and the influence of Yakuza in the society is also decreasing. In the future, many Koreans may not be forced into a life of crime like before. In conclusion, the Yakuza's Korean member exists due to historic discrimination as well as exclusion from the Japanese society. Like other marginalized groups, they turned to the Yakuza. It was the only way they can survive as well as move up the system that excluded them. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys again next time. And some of the videos that are coming up includes why the Washington Wizards have so many fans on Chinese Twitter. And other videos include how Vancouver is transformed by Chinese immigrants, as well as the economics of Pokemon.